The rancher lived alone for years. Until he brought home the last Apache beauty, the rancher had lived alone for so many years that even he had stopped counting them. The land around him had become his only companion. Wide open fields stretched under the sky, dry grass bending with the wind, and mountains standing quietly in the distance. His ranch was far from the main road, far from town, and even farther from the kind of life most people lived. He woke up before sunrise, worked until his body was tired, and went to sleep with the sound of insects and wind instead of voices. People in the nearby town knew him, but only from a distance. They called him a good man, a hard worker, but also a strange one. He rarely joined gatherings. He did his shopping quickly and left without long conversations. Some thought he was proud. Others thought he was broken. The truth was simpler and heavier. He had chosen silence because noise reminded him of things he had lost. Years ago, his life had been different. There had been laughter in his house, warm meals shared at the table, and plans for the future spoken out loud. But life had not followed those plans. One by one, the things he loved were taken away by events he could not control. Loss taught him a lesson he never wanted to learn, that loving deeply also meant hurting deeply. So he stepped away. He chose land over people, work over words, and solitude over hope. His days followed the same pattern. He fed the horses, checked the fences, repaired what was broken, and rode across his land with steady focus. The animals trusted him. They did not ask questions or expect stories. They only responded to care and calm, and that suited him fine. At night, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sky turn dark. Sometimes he remembered old faces, but he never chased those memories for long. He had learned how to push them aside. The land, however, remembered everything. Old trails crossed his property, paths made long before fences and signs. The rancher knew those paths well, though he rarely thought about who had walked them first. He respected the land in his own quiet way, fixing the soil, protecting the water, and never taking more than he needed. Still, history rested beneath his boots, even if he did not speak of it. One late afternoon, as the sun began to sink low and paint the sky in soft orange light, the rancher noticed something unusual near the edge of his property. One of the horses became restless, lifting its head and stepping nervously. The rancher followed the animal's gaze toward a cluster of trees near a dry creek bed. At first, he thought it might be a wild animal. Then he saw movement that did not belong to the wilderness. A woman stepped out slowly from behind the trees. She looked exhausted, her clothes dusty, her posture guarded. She did not rush forward or call out. She simply stood there, as if unsure whether she was welcome in the open space before her. The rancher froze, surprised by the sudden presence of another human on land where he rarely saw anyone. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. The wind carried the sound of dry leaves and distant birds, filling the silence between them. The rancher noticed her eyes first. They were sharp but tired, alert yet calm. She looked like someone who had learned to be strong not because she wanted to be, but because she had no other choice. He had many reasons to turn away. He valued his privacy. He did not want questions or complications. Yet something in her stillness stopped him. She was not asking for help with words, but her presence spoke clearly enough. This was not someone looking for trouble. This was someone who had nowhere else to go. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice rough from lack of use. He asked if she was lost. She nodded slowly and said little else. Her voice was quiet, careful, as if every word mattered. She explained that she had been walking for hours, trying to reach a place that no longer existed the way she remembered it. The world had changed faster than she had. The rancher listened without interrupting. Listening was something he was good at, even if he rarely spoke. He noticed how she stood tall despite her exhaustion, how she avoided looking directly at the house behind him, as if she feared being turned away. The sun dipped lower and the air began to cool. He offered her water. She hesitated, then accepted. As she drank, he saw how carefully she handled even small kindness, like someone used to disappointment. He asked where she was from. She answered honestly, naming a community few people spoke about anymore. Her words carried pride but also sadness. It was clear she belonged to a history many preferred to forget. The rancher felt an uncomfortable weight settle in his chest. He was a man who avoided involvement, yet here he was standing at the edge of a decision. If he sent her away, he could return to his routine without change. If he helped her, even in a small way, his quiet life would no longer be untouched. He thought of the land again, of the old paths crossing his ranch. He wondered who had once stood where she stood now, facing the same uncertainty. The thought unsettled him. He told her she could rest for a while. Nothing more, nothing promised. Just a place to sit, water to drink, and time to breathe. She thanked him without exaggeration, her gratitude calm and sincere. That alone surprised him. Many people thanked loudly. She thanked deeply. As she followed him toward the house, the rancher felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. It was not romance, not pity, but a quiet awareness that this moment mattered. He did not know why yet, but he sensed that his long years of solitude had led to this crossroads. The house, once filled with life, had become a place of order and emptiness. Everything had its place, but nothing felt warm. As she stepped inside, she looked around respectfully, touching nothing without permission. He offered her a chair and some food. Again, she hesitated, then accepted. They did not talk much. Words were unnecessary. The rancher watched as she ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the meal might disappear if she rushed. He realized then how long it must have been since anyone had offered her safety without conditions. Night fell quietly outside. The stars appeared one by one as they always did, but inside the house something had shifted. The silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It carried presence. The rancher told himself this was temporary, just one night, just a human choice, nothing more. Yet deep down, he knew that bringing her into his home had already changed something he could not undo. As he stepped onto the porch later that night, looking out over his land, he felt the past and the present meet in an uncomfortable way. For years he had lived untouched by the world's pain beyond his fences. Now that pain sat quietly under his roof. He did not yet know her full story. He did not yet know his role in it. But as the wind moved across the fields and the stars watched silently above, one truth became clear. The life he had built on distance and silence was about to be tested, and nothing would remain the same after this night. Morning arrived slowly on the ranch, carried in by pale light and the sound of birds settling on the fence posts. The rancher woke earlier than usual, his mind already alert. For a brief moment, he forgot why sleep had felt lighter than normal. Then he remembered the quiet guest resting in the small spare room at the end of the hall. The realization brought a strange mix of caution and responsibility, emotions he had not felt in a long time. He moved carefully through the house, not wanting to disturb her. The floorboards creaked under his boots, reminding him how used he was to being alone. He brewed coffee, the familiar smell filling the kitchen, and set out simple food on the table. He told himself this was only courtesy, nothing more. Still, he noticed how he paid attention to details he usually ignored. When she appeared in the doorway, she looked more rested, though her eyes remained alert. She thanked him again, quietly, and sat across from him at the table. The morning light revealed more of her story than words could. There were marks of hardship in her posture, but also dignity. She carried herself with calm control, as if the world had tested her many times and she had learned how to endure without complaint. They spoke slowly, choosing words with care. She shared that she had been moving from place to place, trying to reconnect with what remained of her family's land and history. Much of it was gone now, divided, renamed, or forgotten. Each stop had brought disappointment. Some places turned her away. Others treated her as a memory that no longer mattered. She did not speak with anger, only with honesty. The rancher listened, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. He had always believed hard work could fix most things. Her story reminded him that some losses could not be repaired with effort alone. There were wounds caused by time and neglect, and they did not heal easily. Later that morning, he rode out to check the fences, leaving her at the house. He expected to feel uneasy about leaving someone alone in his space. Instead, he felt an unfamiliar trust. From the hill overlooking the ranch, he could see the roof of his house, small against the wide land. For years, it had been a symbol of isolation. Now it held another life inside it, and the thought stayed with him longer than expected. In town, word traveled quickly. Someone had seen her near his property the day before. Curiosity turned into quiet talk. People wondered who she was and why she was there. Some spoke with interest, others with doubt. Few spoke with kindness. The rancher felt the shift even before anyone said anything to him directly. He had lived on the edge of community long enough to recognize the signs. When he returned that afternoon, she was sitting on the porch, watching the horizon. She rose when she saw him, respectful but not afraid. He told her about the town, about how people notice changes quickly. She nodded, already aware. This was not her first experience with attention she did not ask for. She explained more of her background then. Her people had once lived across wide lands, guided by tradition and responsibility. Over time, those connections weakened, not because they wanted them to, but because survival demanded adaptation. She had grown up learning stories that no longer had places attached to them. The world had taught her to move quietly and depend on herself. As she spoke, the rancher felt his understanding deepen. He had chosen isolation to protect himself. She had been pushed into it by circumstances. The difference mattered. It shifted how he saw her presence on his land. That evening, a truck slowed near the ranch gate before driving on. The message was clear enough. They were being watched. The rancher felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to withdraw. But when he looked at her, standing steady despite the attention, he felt something else rise instead. A sense of responsibility he could not ignore. He made dinner and they ate together again. Conversation flowed more easily now. They spoke about the land, about weather patterns, about the way animals reacted before storms. She shared knowledge passed down through her family, observations about the land that surprised him. He realized she saw the ranch not as property, but as a living place. The thought stayed with him long after the meal ended. Night brought quiet again, but it was no longer comfortable silence. It carried weight. He sat on the porch, listening to the wind while she rested inside. His thoughts returned to the town, to how easily people judged what they did not understand. He had avoided conflict his entire life. Avoidance had kept him safe, but it had also kept him alone. The next day, a man from town stopped by under the excuse of checking fences near the road. His questions were casual but pointed. Who was the woman? How long was she staying? The rancher answered briefly, offering nothing extra. The man left with a nod, but the tension lingered in the air long after the dust from his truck settled. She noticed the rancher's unease and spoke later that afternoon. She told him she never intended to cause trouble. If her presence brought him difficulty, she would leave. Her words were calm, but he could hear the familiar acceptance of rejection beneath them. It struck him deeply. She had already prepared herself to be turned away again. He surprised himself by answering without hesitation. He told her she could stay a while longer. Not as charity, but as a choice. The words felt heavy but also right. He did not explain further and she did not ask. The understanding between them was enough. That night, sleep came slowly for him. He lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ranch, thinking about the path he had stepped onto. He knew the town would not let this go easily. He knew questions would turn into pressure. Yet for the first time in years, the idea of standing his ground did not feel like a burden. Outside, the land rested under the stars, unchanged and patient. Inside the house, two lives moved cautiously toward an unknown future. The rancher understood now that her story was not just about the past. It was unfolding in the present, and by allowing her to stay, he had become part of it. Days passed, and life on the ranch slowly settled into a new rhythm. The rancher noticed the change in small ways before he fully understood it. The house no longer felt empty when he returned from the fields. There was a cup left to dry near the sink, a blanket folded on the chair, quiet signs of another person sharing the space. None of it disturbed him. Instead, it softened something inside him that had been hard for a long time. They did not rush into conversation or closeness. Both were careful, moving around each other with respect. In the mornings, she helped where she could, sweeping the porch, preparing simple meals, or sitting quietly outside while he worked nearby. She never touched tools without asking. She never assumed anything was hers. The rancher noticed this and admired her restraint. It showed strength, not weakness. As days turned into a week, they began talking more naturally. Their conversations were simple but meaningful. They spoke about the weather, the animals, and the land. She asked questions that surprised him, not because they were difficult, but because they showed attention. She noticed patterns in the soil, changes in the wind, and the way birds behaved before dusk. She spoke of the land as something to listen to, not control. The rancher found himself listening in return. He had worked this land for years, but he had never thought about it the way she did. Her perspective made him see familiar places differently. A dry patch of ground was no longer just a problem to fix, but a sign of deeper change. A bend in the creek was not just erosion, but a memory of how water once moved freely. Sometimes, silence returned between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt shared. The rancher realized that this kind of silence was different from the one he had lived in before. It did not isolate him. It connected him. In town, the talk did not stop. Some people watched the ranch more closely now. Others spoke quietly in stores and cafes. The rancher sensed it whenever he went to buy supplies. Conversations paused when he entered. Eyes followed him longer than usual. He kept his head down and finished his business, but the weight of attention followed him home. She noticed the change in him too. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky darken, she spoke gently. She told him she had lived her whole life feeling like she did not belong anywhere for long. When people noticed her, it was rarely for good reasons. She said she did not want to bring that burden into his life. He thought carefully before responding. He told her that he had chosen this land to escape the noise of the world. But escape had not brought peace, only quiet. Her presence, though challenging, felt more honest than the silence he had built around himself. He admitted this slowly, unsure of his own words but certain of their truth. As the days passed, trust grew between them in quiet ways. He showed her the boundaries of the ranch, explaining where the land dipped and where the soil turned rocky. She listened closely, remembering everything. She shared stories in return, not all at once but in pieces. Stories about elders who taught her patience, about songs that carried lessons, about traditions meant to guide people through hardship. He did not interrupt or question. He understood that these stories were not entertainment. They were pieces of her identity. Listening became a form of respect. One afternoon, a vehicle stopped near the ranch gate again. This time, two people stepped out. Their approach was calm, but their presence felt heavy. They asked questions about her stay, about her background, about how long she intended to remain. The rancher answered steadily, choosing his words with care. He felt the old instinct to retreat, but he did not give in to it. She stood nearby, her posture calm, her expression steady. She did not speak unless spoken to, but her presence was strong. When the visitors left, the rancher noticed how his hands trembled slightly. He had faced hard moments before, but this felt different. It was not about land or work. It was about standing beside another person. That evening, she thanked him for not sending her away. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed emotion she did not try to hide. He realized then how much courage it took for her to stay, knowing she was not fully welcome in the world beyond the ranch. As weeks passed, routines deepened. They shared meals more often. Sometimes they laughed quietly over small mistakes or simple observations. The rancher found himself looking forward to these moments. It unsettled him at first. He had trained himself not to expect connection. Now, connection was happening without effort. Yet tension remained, always present at the edges. He knew that the town's patience was thin. He knew that choices made in silence would soon need to be defended out loud. He wondered if he was ready for that. More importantly, he wondered if he was willing to let her face it alone. One night, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Rain fell hard and the wind shook the house. The rancher checked the animals while she stayed inside, watching from the window. When he returned, soaked and tired, she handed him a dry cloth without a word. The gesture was small, but it stayed with him. It was care given naturally, without expectation. Later, as the storm passed, they sat together, listening to the rain fade. She spoke about the meaning of shelter, how her people believed a home was not just walls, but intention. A place became safe because of how people treated each other inside it. The rancher felt those words settle deep within him. That night, he lay awake again, but this time his thoughts were clear. He understood that what was happening on his ranch was not temporary, even if he pretended it was. Lives were intersecting. Choices were forming. The quiet life he had built was changing shape. Outside, the land absorbed the rain, patient and enduring. Inside, two people continued learning how to share space without losing themselves. The rancher knew challenges were coming. He could feel them approaching like distant thunder. But for the first time, the idea of facing them did not feel empty or pointless. He did not yet know how far he would go to protect this fragile balance. He only knew that returning to the life he had before no longer felt possible. Something had taken root on his land, something stronger than habit and deeper than solitude. And whether he was ready or not, it was growing. The change did not come all at once. It arrived in small moments, in looks that lasted too long and conversations that stopped when the rancher entered a room. The town had always kept its distance from him, but now that distance felt sharper. He could sense questions forming behind polite smiles. He could feel judgment growing where curiosity had once lived. One morning, as he loaded supplies into his truck, a familiar voice called his name. An old acquaintance from town approached, speaking in a friendly tone that did not quite reach his eyes. He asked about the ranch, about business, and then, as if by accident, asked about the woman staying with him. The rancher answered calmly, keeping his words simple. The man nodded, but his interest did not fade. It was clear that the town wanted answers, whether he gave them or not. When the rancher returned home, he found her working quietly near the fence, repairing a loose post. She looked up and smiled slightly, as if sensing his thoughts without hearing them. That small gesture reminded him why he had allowed things to continue this far. She did not ask for protection, yet her presence had awakened something protective in him. By the end of that week, the questions became more direct. A letter arrived, formal in tone, asking him to clarify who was living on his property and under what arrangement. The rancher read it twice, feeling a tightness in his chest. For years, he had avoided attention by staying quiet. Now silence felt like surrender. He showed the letter to her that evening. She read it carefully, then folded it and handed it back without panic. She told him she understood if he wanted her to leave. She said she had never stayed anywhere long enough to cause trouble, and she did not want to start now. Her voice was steady, but the rancher could hear the familiar pattern beneath it. She was preparing herself to walk away again. Something inside him resisted that outcome. He realized that letting her leave would not bring him peace. It would only return him to the emptiness he had grown used to, an emptiness that now felt heavier than before. He told her he would handle it. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. The next day, he drove into town and went straight to the office mentioned in the letter. The building felt cold and official, far removed from the open land he loved. He spoke clearly and honestly. He explained that she was his guest, that she posed no problem, and that his property was not being misused. The people across the desk listened, their expressions unreadable. They told him they would review the matter. When he returned to the ranch, she was waiting. She did not ask what was said. She only asked if he was all right. That question stayed with him longer than any official response could have. It reminded him that standing up was not just about resisting pressure. It was about choosing who mattered. Over the next few days, more people visited the ranch under polite excuses. Some asked questions. Others simply looked around as if searching for something out of place. The rancher remained calm, answering only what was necessary. He noticed how she carried herself during these visits. She stayed present, calm, never shrinking, never challenging. Her dignity spoke louder than any argument. One evening, a neighbor he had known for years stopped by unexpectedly. The man spoke openly, warning him that the town did not like changes it could not control. He suggested that things would be easier if the woman moved on. The rancher listened quietly, then replied that ease was not always the same as what was right. The neighbor left without another word. That night, the rancher felt the weight of his choices more than ever. He sat alone on the porch, listening to the familiar sounds of the land. For years, those sounds had comforted him. Now, they felt like witnesses. He realized that avoiding conflict had shaped his life just as much as loss had. Avoidance had kept him safe, but it had also kept him from growth. Inside the house, she was packing a small bag. When he noticed, he felt a sharp sting of fear. She explained that she wanted to be ready just in case. She had learned that uncertainty required preparation. He told her she did not need to pack. Not yet. His voice carried more certainty than he expected. The following week brought a meeting. This time, it was not a letter or a casual visit. It was a request for him to come and speak publicly about the situation. The rancher felt the pressure build. Speaking publicly was something he had avoided all his life. Yet he knew that refusing would only invite more suspicion. On the day of the meeting, he stood in a plain room filled with people he recognized and many he did not. He felt exposed, far from the protection of his land. When it was his turn to speak, he kept his words simple. He talked about property, about responsibility, and about human decency. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. He spoke calmly with honesty. He said that the woman staying with him was not a problem to be solved. She was a person. He said that his land had room for more than one life and that offering shelter was not a crime. The room grew quiet as he spoke. Some people looked away. Others listened closely. When he finished, there was no applause. There was only silence. But in that silence, he felt something shift. He had spoken not just to defend her, but to reclaim a part of himself he had buried long ago. The days that followed were tense, but the pressure slowly eased. Visits became less frequent. Questions lost their sharpness. The town moved on to other concerns, as towns always do. The rancher knew the situation was not fully resolved, but it was no longer a threat hanging over them. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she stood beside him near the fence line. She thanked him again, but this time her words carried more than gratitude. They carried recognition. She told him that standing up like that took courage, especially for someone who had learned to live quietly. He admitted that he had been afraid. He also admitted that fear no longer felt like a reason to step back. As they watched the light fade over the land, the rancher understood that this chapter of his life was not about rescue or sacrifice. It was about choice. He had chosen to step into responsibility rather than hide behind habit. He had chosen to let his life be changed. The land around them remained the same, steady and enduring. But within that familiar landscape, something had shifted permanently. The rancher knew that challenges would still come. Acceptance was rarely complete, and peace was never guaranteed. Yet he also knew that returning to his old life of distance was no longer an option. He had taken a stand, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. And in doing so, he had discovered a strength he did not know he still possessed. The weeks that followed were calmer, but the calm felt earned, not accidental. The rancher noticed it first in the way the air felt lighter when he stepped outside each morning. The land looked the same, the fences still needed care, and the animals followed their routines, yet something within him had settled. The tension that once lived in his chest had eased, replaced by a quiet sense of direction. She remained on the ranch, not as a guest waiting to leave, but as someone who belonged in the daily rhythm of the place. They never spoke about labels or future plans. Instead, they let time do its work. Each day added another small layer of trust, another shared task, another moment of understanding that did not need explanation. She began tending a small section of land near the creek, planting seeds she had carried with her for years. They were simple plants, meant to restore the soil rather than impress the eye. The rancher watched her work with care and patience, noticing how she spoke softly to the ground as she planted. He did not question it. He had learned that some forms of respect did not need words. As the plants began to grow, so did a sense of balance between them. She did not replace anything he had lost. She did not fill an empty space with noise or demands. Instead, she stood beside him, steady and present. The rancher realized that companionship did not have to be loud to be real. In town, attitudes shifted slowly. People still noticed her, but the sharp edge of suspicion dulled over time. A few greeted her politely. Others kept their distance. The rancher no longer measured his actions by their reactions. He had learned that waiting for approval only delayed peace. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with a small offering from his garden. The gesture was simple, but meaningful. The rancher accepted it without comment. It was not forgiveness or acceptance, but it was movement. And movement was enough. Life on the ranch continued through seasons. Summer gave way to cooler nights, and the land responded with quiet beauty. The woman shared stories of how her people marked time, not by calendars but by changes in the earth and sky. The rancher listened, realizing that he had spent much of his life ignoring those same signs. There were moments of difficulty, too. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Old fears whispered late at night. Sometimes the rancher worried about what the future might demand of him. In those moments, she did not offer solutions. She offered presence, sitting nearby, listening, allowing silence to exist without fear. One evening, as they watched the sunset stretch across the fields, she spoke about home. She said home was not a place that never changed. It was a place that allowed change without punishment. The rancher thought about his years of isolation, about how he had mistaken distance for safety. He understood now that safety built on walls eventually turned inward. As time passed, she became known less as a question and more as a part of the landscape. People saw her working, helping, existing without disruption. The rancher noticed that the land itself seemed to respond. The soil near the creek held moisture better. The animals moved calmly around her. He did not claim understanding. He simply observed. One morning, he found her standing at the edge of the property, looking out toward the old trail that cut across the land. She told him she had decided to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen this place. The words stayed with him long after she walked back toward the house. That night, the rancher sat alone on the porch, looking at the stars. He thought about the man he had been years ago, closed off and convinced that solitude was strength. He thought about the choices he had made since then, allowing someone in, standing up when it mattered, accepting change rather than resisting it. He realized that his life had not been saved or transformed in a dramatic way. It had been redirected, slowly and quietly, through ordinary courage and shared humanity. The land had not healed him on its own. Neither had time. What healed him was the decision to stop turning away. As winter approached, the house grew warmer in ways it never had before. Meals were shared without hesitation. Work was divided naturally. Laughter appeared in brief, unexpected moments. None of it felt forced. It felt earned. The rancher understood now that living alone had protected him from pain, but it had also protected him from meaning. By opening his life to another person, he had accepted both risk and reward. He had chosen connection over certainty. The woman continued honoring her past while building something new. She did not forget where she came from, and she did not ask the rancher to become something he was not. They met each other where they stood, grounded in respect rather than expectation. In time, the ranch no longer felt like a refuge from the world. It felt like a place within it, a place where history was acknowledged, not erased, a place where two lives moved forward together without needing to define themselves by loss. The rancher no longer counted the years he had lived alone. Those years mattered, but they no longer defined him. What defined him now were the choices he made each day: to listen, to stand firm, to allow space for another story alongside his own. As the land rested under a clear winter sky, the rancher knew that peace was not the absence of conflict or hardship. It was the presence of purpose. And on that quiet stretch of land, with the wind moving gently across the fields, he had finally found it.